This is TWiT.
So what if you were having a conversation with someone over the phone or voice chat, and instead of it being human on the other line, it was actually a computer, indistinguishable from a human? Would you feel tricked? Would you feel violated? Would you think that they should have disclosed themselves as if they were not human in the beginning of the conversation? Would you think, man, how can I get a hold of that tool? Well, during Google I/O this past week, Google debuted Google Duplex. It's a proof of concept that uses natural language understanding, deep learning, text-to-speech fluency, and other technologies to perform the tedious tasks for people of setting up appointments. We do have a quick clip here to show how it does. It's actually kind of scary.
So how can I help you?
Hi, I'm calling to book a women's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd.
Sure, give me 1 second.
That's Google, by the way.
Sure, what time are you looking for around?
At 12 p.m.
We
Scary.
do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15.
Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.?
Depending on what service she would like. What service is she looking for?
Just a woman's haircut for now.
Okay, we have a 10 o'clock.
So yeah, we could cut it off there. I think
Okay, what's your first name?
I think the interesting part here, though, is it's just kind of scary because they understand the nuances of the conversation, and then they kind of wade through the idiosyncrasies of the different dialects here, and plus they have the ability to kind of go in different directions based off the conversation. And if you listen, Duplex even throws in there a couple filler words like and ah, which are normally ways for people that, you know, when they're trying to decide something to say. So that latency in between that delay definitely makes it sound even more human. It's essentially like a psychological trick that humans think, hey, the computers would never do that. So the system even uses tricks to distinguish when AI doesn't understand. It can bring the conversation back on track. It can also navigate a series of misunderstandings by rephrasing the question or repeating it. It even uses verbal tricks such as including elaborations like, hey, for Friday next week, the 18th, or syncs like, can you hear me? Or interruptions like, the number is 212. Oh, sorry. Can you start over? If the call goes entirely wrong, a human can actually take over, like an operator. So there are several interesting nuances to the system that can actually be improved. And in fact, what I noticed is if the system detects what the system could do, instead of kind of going through the nuances of the different dialects, if the system detected that English wasn't the first dialect or the first language that the person, or their native language that they speak, that it could make it easier by maybe speaking in that person's native language, or maybe asking them that this way it makes it easier not to have to kind of navigate through all the different nuances of a conversation. Also, professionalism. Now, the way that they've actually devised the system is that they attempt to mimic human faults, and makes it seem almost unconfident in its dialect. So to me, that kind of turns off the system. It turns me off on the system, because if you were to essentially leave a conversation with somebody and thinking, wow, that person was clear and concise and confident what they're saying, and they're very commanding, it would seem like a much better service. But in this case, it seemed kind of uneasy, unsure what they're doing. And so it's very interesting that they're kind of taking that approach and moving forward. But it does set up a couple questions here. So throw it over to you, Padre. It sounds like almost an ethical issue. Like, for instance, this is mimicking how humans are actually behaving, and the person on the other line has no idea that it's actually a computer. Is this something that we're going to have fixed in the future? Are we going to have to make some kind of law that says, hey, you have to make sure you say this before you can start the conversation, like, hey, you're being recorded, or hey, I'm not human, rather than actually kind of jumping right in?
I don't think there's any need to be a law, but I think there definitely needs to be customers expressing their preferences. Like, for example, I don't think any voice assistant like a Duplex or whatever Microsoft is coming up with on their side, or Amazon, should have a conversation with a human without first informing the human that this is an automated conversation, because that's a huge potential for some mix-ups. It's just rude. In the world of AI, that's considered rude, not to inform someone that they're speaking to an AI. And especially since the Duplex goes through the trouble of mimicking human speech patterns, of delaying and drawing out and saying So obviously they're trying to do something. If this was an actual physical presence, this would be so firmly in the uncanny valley that people would just kind of reel back in revulsion. And we all know that. When you see something that's almost lifelike, but just not completely lifelike, it just feels off. It's the same thing with this. It's almost like lifelike, but just not there. And I think you can avoid a lot of those issues if you just tell people, look, this is an automated assistant. If you would prefer to speak to a real person, please press 1.
Right. So, Curtis, what about this? What about the next? Do we think that this is going to have some security implications? Could this be the culmination of the next generation of spam callers?
I will say that it gets even more fascinating. Let's walk down this particular paranoid fantasy walk. We know that we've seen proof of concept of attackers being able to do things like play a snippet of music or play what sounds like an innocuous text string and embedded within it at a level that humans can't hear really are the commands to trigger one of the voice assistants. So we know that's possible. Now, what if instead of a human being having to make that call, what if instead of having to do this via a standard phishing campaign where you've got to get someone to click on a link or open an attachment, you just called them and you had your robotic voice assistant placing millions of these calls just to see which ones would hit. All of a sudden, in the same way that email lost a lot of its value after spam became such a high percentage of all email messages, we could easily see a situation where voice assistants or voice messaging loses a lot of its effectiveness and efficiency because of just an overwhelming number of spam calls.